In this gripping story, Ethan Carlisle, a high-powered executive on a flight to Paris, finds his rightful place in business class unexpectedly challenged, sparking a powerful journey of resilience, reflection, and resolve. Through moments of subtle bias and quiet validation, Ethan reaffirms his commitment to a legacy of respect and integrity in the corporate world. Before we dive into Ethan's journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories about determination, leadership, and overcoming challenges. Now, let's embark on this unforgettable journey with Ethan Carlisle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over Summit Bay Airport, Ethan Carlisle navigated the bustling terminal with calm efficiency. Tall and sharply dressed, Ethan exuded a quiet confidence that came from years of navigating high-stakes boardrooms. Today, however, he wasn't here to close deals or negotiate terms. He was simply looking forward to a peaceful flight. He'd spent the past week in grueling merger negotiations that would reshape the logistics industry, and now, with the contract signed, all he wanted was a few hours to unwind. He glanced around at the crowd in the terminal, families on vacation, business travelers like himself, and solo adventurers on their own journeys. It was a familiar scene, but today the energy felt heightened, a buzz of anticipation in the air. Ethan, however, only focused on reaching his gate. As he neared Gate 32, he pulled out his boarding pass and noted his seat. 1B, business class. He could afford the luxury of first class, but he often chose business, comfortable, efficient, and above all, private enough to get some much-needed rest. The gate agent gave him a polite smile as she scanned his boarding pass. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carlisle," she said, handing it back. He acknowledged her with a nod and moved toward the jet bridge, already feeling the tension of the past week begin to lift. Just a few hours of calm on this flight to Paris, and he'd be ready to meet the new team waiting for him. As he boarded, the cool, perfumed air of the plane greeted him, promising a smooth and restful journey. Yet, unbeknownst to Ethan, his simple flight would soon test his patience and resilience in ways he hadn't anticipated. Ethan handed his boarding pass to the flight attendant at the plane's entrance. She gave him a quick smile as she checked it, but he noticed a fleeting hesitation in her expression, a slight shift that he couldn't quite place. Her smile remained, but her eyes held a flicker of uncertainty, as if she'd noted something unexpected. Brushing it off, he continued into the business class cabin, focusing on unwinding. This was a rare chance for him to relax, a short respite from the endless demands of corporate life. He was used to high-stakes meetings and negotiations, but this time he was simply a passenger, ready to decompress and prepare for the days ahead in Paris. The cabin was already filling up with passengers, each settling into their routines. As he found his seat, 1B, Ethan felt the weight of the past week begin to lift. He stowed his carry-on, took his seat, and reached for the glass of orange juice waiting on his armrest, appreciating the small comforts that business class offered. As he took a sip, he noticed the same flight attendant from earlier glancing his way, her expression more guarded than before. Their eyes met briefly, and she quickly looked away, a hint of tension visible in her demeanor. Ethan dismissed it, focusing instead on the journey ahead. This was supposed to be a simple flight, a chance to regroup before diving into the next phase of the merger. Unaware of what lay ahead, he leaned back, letting the quiet hum of the cabin lull him into a sense of calm. Ethan relaxed into his seat, letting out a quiet sigh of relief. The plush leather was inviting, and he could feel the tension from his week of negotiations slowly melting away. He took another sip of his juice, savoring the fresh citrus taste, and powered up his tablet, intending to review notes for his upcoming meetings in Paris. Around him, other passengers were settling into their seats, adding to the peaceful ambiance. Some adjusted their blankets, while others exchanged polite greetings with nearby travelers. Ethan found comfort in the familiar rhythm, with each detail reassuring him that his journey would be uneventful and calm. As he skimmed through his documents, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at what he had accomplished. The merger had been tough, an uphill battle in an ever-competitive market, but he'd come through with the deal signed and the path to growth clear. Soon, he would be introducing himself to the new team and setting his vision for the future. He was ready. Just as he settled deeper into his seat, he noticed the same flight attendant from before approaching. This time her expression wasn't just guarded, it was uncertain, as if she were steeling herself to deliver difficult news. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone hesitant. "Could I see your boarding pass once more?" Ethan looked up, surprised. He had already shown his pass at the gate. "Of course," he replied, handing it over, puzzled at the unusual request. She took the pass, her eyes darting between it and his seat number several times, her expression one of growing unease. The flight attendant took a deep breath, glancing around as if searching for support before she spoke. "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be an issue. We've encountered a system error, and this seat wasn't supposed to be assigned." Ethan frowned, a mix of disbelief and confusion stirring within him. "A system error?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with curiosity. "My boarding pass says 1B. I booked this seat specifically." She nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "I understand, sir. Unfortunately, we'll need to relocate you to the economy cabin. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. Economy? After all the work he'd put into earning his place here, this felt absurd. Keeping his voice steady, he replied, "With all due respect, I paid for this seat, and my boarding pass confirms it. I don't see why I should be the one to move." The flight attendant's face tightened slightly, her initial warmth replaced by a hint of frustration. "I understand, sir, but we need your cooperation to resolve this situation." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling a familiar sense of frustration building. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it felt like a challenge to his rightful place. Glancing around, he noticed a few nearby passengers starting to take interest, sensing the tension. "I'm sorry," he said firmly, "but I'm not moving to economy. If there's an issue, I suggest you speak to your supervisor. I paid for this seat, and I intend to stay here." The attendant hesitated, clearly flustered by his resolve, but nodded and walked away, leaving Ethan with a mixture of frustration and determination. He had worked too hard to be displaced without a proper explanation, and he wasn't about to give up his seat so easily. A few moments later, the flight attendant returned, her expression even more uncertain than before. She was accompanied by a man in a crisp uniform, clearly the cabin manager. He approached Ethan with a formal smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Carlisle," the cabin manager began, his tone polite but firm, "I apologize for the inconvenience, but it appears there's been a system error. We need you to move to the economy cabin. We understand this isn't ideal, so we'd like to offer a travel voucher for the inconvenience." Ethan felt a surge of frustration. He met the manager's gaze steadily, his voice calm but resolute. "With all due respect, I paid for this seat, and my boarding pass confirms it. I don't see why I should be the one to move due to an error that wasn't my fault." The manager's expression tightened slightly, though he kept his tone neutral. "Mr. Carlisle, we're dealing with a fully booked flight, and this seat was mistakenly assigned to multiple passengers. We're simply asking for your cooperation." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "So the seat was double booked, and I'm the one being asked to move?" The manager hesitated, his brief pause speaking volumes. Ethan sensed the unspoken assumptions, the quiet expectation that he would yield without resistance. "If there's been a mistake, it's not mine," Ethan replied firmly. "I have every right to stay here, and I won't move to economy. I suggest finding another solution." The manager's patience was clearly waning, but before he could respond, a new voice interrupted. "Is everything okay here?" A younger flight attendant approached, her calm demeanor offering a sense of relief. The manager glanced at her but seemed reluctant to engage further, muttering, "I'll speak with the lead purser," and hurried off. Ethan watched him go, frustration still simmering but now mixed with a quiet resolve. Ethan sat back in his seat, the simmering frustration growing stronger. Around him, a few passengers had begun to notice the tense exchange and were casting curious glances in his direction. He sensed the silent judgment, and a familiar thought crept into his mind, one he often tried to push aside. Would this be happening if he looked different? He'd faced similar situations before, instances where his presence in certain spaces was questioned, no matter his success or how far he'd come. Each experience left a subtle sting, a reminder of the biases he'd learned to navigate but never truly escape. As the hum of conversation around him quieted, The flight attendant returned with a composed but slightly exasperated expression. "Mr. Carlisle," she began softly, "we need your cooperation to handle this smoothly. This seat needs to be reassigned." Ethan's gaze remained steady. "With respect, I don't see why I should give up my seat because of an error that isn't mine. I booked this, I paid for it, and my boarding pass confirms my right to stay." The attendant's face flushed slightly as she seemed to sense the nearby passengers paying close attention. "Please, sir," she insisted, her voice dropping to a lower pitch, "we don't want to escalate the situation." Ethan held her gaze. "If there's a problem, I suggest speaking to a supervisor. But I won't be downgraded because of an error outside of my control." A few murmurs arose from nearby passengers, the tension palpable. Ethan could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken challenge to his presence in a space he had rightfully earned. Yet he refused to relent. He wouldn't allow himself to be dismissed without reason. In that moment, his resolve hardened. He would hold his ground, no matter the cost. A few minutes later, the cabin manager returned, his expression carefully neutral, yet laced with an air of quiet authority. He approached Ethan with a measured tone, aiming to de-escalate the situation, but also clearly hoping for a quick resolution. "Mr. Carlisle," he began, his voice formal, "I understand that this situation is inconvenient, and we regret the error. However, we're dealing with a fully booked flight, and we need your assistance. We're prepared to offer a travel voucher and additional mileage credits as compensation." Ethan took a steady breath, refusing to let frustration dictate his response. He looked up at the manager and replied calmly, "I appreciate the offer, but this isn't about compensation. This is about the principle. I reserved this seat, confirmed it, and have a boarding pass to prove it. I have every right to stay here." The manager's expression shifted slightly, his patience beginning to wear thin, though he kept his tone polite. "Mr. Carlisle, I assure you, we're doing our best to resolve this with minimal disruption. But given the unique situation, we're requesting your cooperation." Ethan met the manager's gaze, unyielding. "With respect, you're not just asking for cooperation, you're asking me to give up my rightful place. I paid for this seat, and I intend to remain in it." The cabin manager hesitated, glancing around as a few nearby passengers began to listen more intently, sensing the rising tension. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Sir, we're simply trying to handle this as smoothly as possible. If you could please reconsider, it would make this easier for everyone." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm not moving," he said firmly. "If there's an issue, I suggest finding a solution that doesn't involve displacing a paying passenger." The manager's patience was clearly waning, but before he could respond, a younger flight attendant stepped forward, her presence bringing a surprising sense of calm. As the cabin manager stood silent, visibly frustrated, the younger flight attendant approached. Her expression was calm, and she offered a polite nod to both Ethan and the manager, subtly diffusing the tension in the air. She carried a tablet, her gaze attentive and composed, as if she were already searching for a solution. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. The cabin manager glanced at her, a mixture of irritation and relief flashing in his eyes. "We're dealing with a seating issue," he replied, clearly eager to bring the matter to a close. The younger attendant gave a professional nod, and without hesitation, pulled up the seating chart on her tablet. As she scanned the information, her eyes widened slightly, and she turned to the cabin manager. "I see Mr. Carlisle's boarding details here. It appears there may not have been a double booking after all," she said quietly but firmly. Ethan felt a sense of validation wash over him as he watched the cabin manager's face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. She had essentially confirmed what he'd suspected. There was no legitimate reason for him to be moved. A quiet murmur spread through nearby passengers, some of whom seemed to have been following the situation closely. Ethan could feel their silent judgments shifting. Perhaps a mixture of relief for him, or even curiosity about the unusual request he'd faced. The younger attendant turned back to Ethan, her eyes conveying an apologetic sincerity. "Mr. Carlisle, I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. It seems you're in the correct seat. There's no need for you to move." Ethan nodded, grateful but also painfully aware of the implications. The silent judgments, the assumptions, it wasn't lost on him. But for now, he had his seat, and he would stay in it, even as a bitter taste lingered. As the cabin settled back into its usual quiet, Ethan leaned back in his seat, trying to shake off the lingering discomfort. The younger flight attendant had offered him a reassuring smile before walking away, but the incident left a bitter aftertaste, one he couldn't quite ignore. He replayed the sequence of events in his mind: the initial request, the manager's insistence, the silent judgment of the nearby passengers, and finally, the validation from the young attendant. He'd faced subtle biases before, moments when his presence was questioned or met with surprise. Yet, each time, it stung, no matter how far he had come in life. Ethan's mind drifted to past experiences, recalling countless meetings and events where he'd felt the same quiet scrutiny. There had been times when his accomplishments were met with surprise, as if his success contradicted someone's preconceived notions. He had learned to brush off these moments, focusing on his goals and pushing forward. But here, in this confined space, the judgment had felt especially stark. He wondered, just for a moment, if this would have happened if he looked different, if he had fit a more typical image of the corporate executive. Perhaps he wouldn't have been asked to move. Perhaps his presence wouldn't have raised any unspoken questions. As the plane hummed softly, Ethan reminded himself why he had worked so hard. His journey from modest beginnings to boardrooms and mergers had been filled with challenges, many of which he'd overcome with sheer determination. Yet moments like these served as reminders that some battles were not yet behind him. Resolving to stay focused on his goals, Ethan straightened in his seat. He was here to lead, to make an impact, and to ensure that his work spoke louder than any judgment could. This moment was just another test of his resolve. Ethan took a steadying breath, his resolve hardening. He hadn't expected to confront such an experience here, on what was meant to be a straightforward flight, yet it had given him an opportunity to reaffirm his principles. He glanced around, noticing a few lingering glances from nearby passengers, some curious, others indifferent. The unease he'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet determination. He reminded himself that his journey had been paved with obstacles, both overt and subtle. Each challenge had sharpened his ability to stand firm, to trust in his right to occupy spaces he'd worked hard to enter. Today was no different. Regardless of silent judgments or assumptions, he would remain exactly where he belonged, in this seat, on this flight, moving toward the next chapter of his career. As he relaxed back into the leather seat, Ethan allowed himself a moment of calm. He closed his eyes, the steady hum of the plane's engines a welcome backdrop. This journey was more than a flight. It symbolized the persistence and resilience he'd developed over the years. Soon, he would land in Paris, where his new team awaited him, ready to move forward with the merger he had meticulously planned. This incident, however frustrating, would not deter him from his purpose. Opening his eyes, he focused on the screen in front of him, pulling up his notes on the upcoming meetings. He wasn't simply leading a merger. He was setting a standard, creating a culture where respect and integrity took precedence, and where people felt they belonged based on merit alone. Ethan knew he had earned his place, here and in every other space he occupied, and he was determined to keep moving forward, anchored by the resolve that no bias or judgment could shake. As Ethan settled into his seat, the younger flight attendant approached him once again, this time with a quiet but purposeful look. She carried her tablet, and there was a calm professionalism about her, as though she had taken it upon herself to see this matter fully resolved. "Mr. Carlisle," she began softly, her voice respectful, "I just wanted to personally apologize for the confusion. You were, without question, assigned to this seat, and there was no actual issue with your booking." Her sincerity struck a chord with him. Here was someone who, amidst the tension, had shown empathy and commitment to doing her job correctly. Ethan felt a wave of appreciation for her professionalism. It wasn't only her apology that mattered, it was the way she'd handled the situation, asserting his right to be where he belonged. "Thank you," Ethan replied, nodding with genuine gratitude. "I appreciate you taking the time to check. It means a lot." The young flight attendant's face softened, and she gave him a small smile. "You deserve to be here, Mr. Carlisle. I just wanted to make sure that was clear." With that, she left him to his thoughts, her simple words resonating long after she'd walked away. In her own quiet way, she had stood up for him, validating his presence without drawing attention. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. For Ethan, her support felt like a reminder. There were allies in unexpected places, individuals who understood the importance of respect and fairness. It reaffirmed his belief in the power of small actions to make a difference, even in moments of subtle judgment. As the plane continued its journey, he sat back, feeling not just resolved but reassured, knowing he wasn't entirely alone in his pursuit of integrity and respect. Not long after the young flight attendant had reassured him, the cabin manager returned, his expression now a mixture of embarrassment and discomfort. The composed authority he'd projected earlier was noticeably absent, replaced by a quiet reluctance to meet Ethan's gaze directly. "Mr. Carlisle," he began, his voice subdued, "I'd like to personally apologize for the misunderstanding. It appears there was indeed no issue with your booking, and I regret any inconvenience caused." Ethan nodded, acknowledging the apology but saying nothing. Part of him felt validated, yet another part felt a lingering frustration. The error had been resolved, yes, but the underlying assumptions, those silent judgments that had sparked this entire situation, remained unaddressed. The cabin manager hesitated, as if searching for words, then offered a stiff smile. "If there's anything further we can do to make your flight more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask." Ethan gave a polite nod. "Thank you, I appreciate it," he replied, his tone measured. He sensed the manager's desire to put the matter behind them, to move on without digging deeper into what had really transpired. As the manager turned and walked away, Ethan felt both relieved and frustrated. He had been vindicated, yes, but the experience had left a mark. His right to be there had been challenged, his presence questioned, and no apology could fully erase that sting. Reflecting on the young attendant's words, however, Ethan felt a glimmer of reassurance. She had stood up for him in her quiet, determined way, reminding him that there were people who recognized and respected his place. For now, he would let it go. He would continue this journey with the same calm resolve that had brought him this far. But he wouldn't forget this experience. It would be one more motivation in his commitment to shaping a more respectful and inclusive world. Later in the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight journey, the young flight attendant approached Ethan one last time. She knelt slightly beside his seat, her expression open and apologetic. "I wanted to personally apologize, Mr. Carlisle," she said quietly. "I know the experience was unpleasant, and I can only imagine how frustrating it must have felt. You absolutely belonged in this seat from the start, and I regret that you were made to feel otherwise." Ethan met her gaze, feeling the sincerity behind her words. Her empathy went beyond professionalism. It was a genuine acknowledgement of the indignity he'd experienced. "Thank you," he replied. "Your support throughout all of this meant more than you know." The young woman smiled, a mixture of empathy and understanding in her eyes. "People like you inspire change, Mr. Carlisle. I just wanted you to know that not everyone sees things the way they did today." With that, she stood and left him to his thoughts, leaving Ethan with a quiet but powerful sense of validation. Her words lingered, her empathy reinforcing his commitment to the values he held dear. As the cabin settled into a peaceful silence, Ethan allowed his mind to drift back over his journey. He thought of his modest beginnings, the years of tireless effort to make a name for himself, and the countless battles fought along the way. He had learned early on to stand firm, to believe in his right to occupy spaces often closed to people like him. Today's experience had stirred old memories of being questioned, dismissed, and underestimated. Yet, each instance had fortified his determination to move forward. He reminded himself that he was no longer the person who felt out of place. He had earned his place, and he would continue proving it. As the plane soared over the Atlantic, Ethan reaffirmed his commitment to promoting respect, integrity, and inclusion. Today's incident only strengthened his resolve. In Paris, he'd be meeting his new team to lead the merger he had worked tirelessly to finalize. He intended to cultivate a culture where respect transcended titles and backgrounds, where every voice felt valued. Settling deeper into his seat, Ethan felt a renewed determination to lead with purpose. He knew he would use his influence to create spaces where fairness was paramount, spaces that didn't require anyone to justify their place. As the plane climbed higher, Ethan finally allowed himself to relax. The hum of the engines became a comforting lullaby, helping to ease the weight of recent events. He closed his eyes, focusing on the quiet rhythm of the flight, and let his mind rest. For the first time that day, he felt peace. The journey to Paris had been challenging, but he had come through with his integrity intact. Soon he would be landing in a new city, stepping into his role with a fresh sense of purpose and clarity. Today had reminded him of his strength and the principles he held dear. As the plane descended over Paris, Ethan looked out the window, taking in the city's morning light. His focus shifted from the past to the promise of the future awaiting him. After retrieving his bags, he met with his new team, who greeted him warmly, their excitement palpable. Standing with them, he felt the weight of his responsibility. This merger symbolized growth, and he intended to lead with empathy, vision, and the resilience that had carried him here. His team's enthusiasm reminded him of his commitment to fostering a culture of respect and inclusion. In the weeks that followed, Ethan threw himself into his role, setting new standards that championed inclusivity and integrity. His experiences on the flight had only deepened his understanding of what fairness meant in the corporate world, and he wanted his team to embody these values. He initiated open forums and encouraged dialogue, valuing input from every level of the organization. Slowly, his team began to trust him, inspired by his commitment to creating a work environment where everyone felt valued. Ethan's journey to Paris was more than a merger. It was a step toward a legacy built on respect and equity. Months later, as Ethan prepared to return home, he boarded another flight, this time with a sense of calm confidence. The new systems he'd implemented had set a positive tone, and he knew the changes were already making a difference. The flight attendants greeted him warmly, welcoming him to his seat in business class. He noticed the lack of scrutiny, the ease of the exchange, a contrast to his previous experience. He had left a mark, and it felt deeply satisfying to know that he had contributed to a more respectful environment. As the plane soared above the clouds, Ethan reflected on his journey. He was grateful for how far he had come, proud of the resilience and integrity that had guided him. He had faced subtle biases, yet he had overcome them, using each experience as motivation to drive change. Ethan looked ahead with quiet resolve, vowing to continue his work for fairness and inclusion. He was determined to shape a corporate world where everyone's place was respected, where silent judgments held no power. His path was clear, his purpose unwavering. The journey was far from over, but he was ready for every challenge that lay ahead. Thank you for joining us on Ethan Carlisle's powerful journey, a story of resilience, introspection, and the quiet strength it takes to hold one's ground in the face of adversity. Ethan's experience reminds us all of the importance of respect, inclusion, and integrity in every space we occupy. If you found inspiration in Ethan's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more narratives that explore the challenges and triumphs of life's journey. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to sharing more meaningful stories with you.